Hello, I am Teresa Slobuski, head librarian for Penn State Brandywine and the chair of the 2023 Lynd Ward Graphic Novel Prize Jury. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Emily Carrington, author and illustrator of Our Little Secret, published by Drawn and Quarterly, which is our 2023 Lynd Ward Prize winner. Our Little Secret is Carrington's powerful memoir, which expertly weaves together her childhood memories with her adult experiences in seeking justice. Emily, thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with you today.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah. Shall we get started?
Sure.
All right. So you were an illustrator before writing Our Little Secret. What led you to decide to have a memoir be your first graphic novel?
Well, I did a bit of illustration, but I've also done, I tried to express what I was going through also through creative nonfiction and through poetry. So I took courses in that area. But what I found was whatever I ended up writing, I still felt like there was a lot of untold story.
Mhm.
And then after about 30 or so years of not being interested in graphic novels, mainly because I didn't know that there were adult graphic novels out there, I kind of got back into the medium. And I realized this was the perfect way to tell a story because sexual abuse is almost always something that nobody sees. So my answer to that was to make it so that it was able to be seen.
Mhm.
And I found that way, when I got into the story and started telling it, I felt like I was telling the whole story. And when I finally got to the end of the story, I felt like I had told the entire story and there were no residual bits left like there had been when I'd been trying to do the same thing with poetry or creative nonfiction.
Mhm. That's great that the combination uh, of the prose and images really was a way for you to work through all of these ideas that you were struggling with. Um, uh,
Yeah, it was. And I don't know if it's how you express yourself maybe is a reflection of how you think. But I found when I started to go back and think about the things that had happened to me, a lot of what I remembered came to me in as an image.
mm,
So it was as if the words and the images were coming into my head. So I would write the words down and I would literally draw the image in my head. And detail would come back to me that I'd forgotten about. I would see a picture of something that I hadn't thought about for, 30 years.
mm.
So it worked well that way. So instead of an image coming to my head and then me describing the image, I could just draw it.
Yeah, great. In addition to this being your first graphic novel, Our Little Secret, as you mentioned, addresses the difficult topic of childhood sexual abuse. Were there other graphic novels or books about either that trauma or other traumas that helped inform your work or that you would recommend to others?
Well, part of me doing the book was to tell my own story, but part of it also I felt was to fill a bit of a void. I
Mm.
didn't feel like there was something out there that told the whole story in the way that I saw the whole story. But there were some important books that helped me along the way. And um, the book that helped me the most in terms of telling my story wasn't actually a graphic novel. It was a book called I Am Nobody by Greg Gilhooly, who was a hockey star who was molested by his coach. And what was interesting to me in that book is how brave he was.
Mhm.
He spoke about what happened. He spoke about the legal system and his disillusionment with it. He spoke about he used names. He wasn't shy about saying everything about how he felt. And when I read through it, I'm like, this is what happened to me. This is how I feel. And what it showed me is that you could tell the whole story. He told the whole story as far as I could see, and you could survive it
Mhm.
because when you're younger, you're told to keep it secret, and you do keep it secret because you think it's going to destroy you. if you tell anybody. It will shatter your family. It will shatter your standing in the community. You know, it will be a shameful thing and you will never be able to recover from it. So he showed me that you could survive doing this. So that was important for me to be able to actually even do it, because even as an adult, there was still that part of me as a child that was wondering, am I going to survive this?
Yeah.
Another, and there are a few graphic novels out there that deal with the topic. The one that pops to mind the most, I think, is A Child's Life by, I think her name is Phoebe Glockner. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. And she has some beautiful drawings, and she talks about that. And in terms of storytelling, the way I approached remembering it, my biggest influence was Seth. And I listened to some of his podcasts, and he talks about how he approaches memory. And instead of doing things in chronological order, he just starts at one point and he goes by association as to where that takes him. And that's how I approached writing the entire graphic novel.
I think that was really powerful in Our Little Secret, because you do flip between kind of adult Emily and childhood Emily and weave back and forth. And you author Emily separate from adult Emily dealing with the justice system. There's kind of three or more Emilys in the book. And
that was
showing all those sides is something that is definitely unique.
Well, it was like I said, it was inspired by Seth and his podcast and his diary comics and how he remembers things and goes by association. And that was literally the reason why I approached it that way. And I found that I went into one spot. So it was like me remembering and me experiencing it both at the same time and going back and forth. It was the act of remembering as well as what I remembered.
Yeah. So as you came upon this, you decided to maybe pursue the graphic novel format. Was there anything that surprised you as you took on this project, or did you face any challenges, and how did you work through those as you untangled everything?
I suppose I had a lot of little surprises because I hadn't written a book and I hadn't written a graphic novel before. But I think I would have to say my biggest surprise was that the book wrote itself. So every time I sat down to write it, and this is the initial sketches, which I did on just ordinary printer paper with pencil so I could go as fast as I could. What surprised me the most is that I could access the story. It was like a tap I could turn on and off. And so I would sit down and I would almost imagine like a door in my head opening and the story comes out. And it came out as words and pictures. I didn't think of the story. It literally came out in front of me almost like a movie. And I would write it down and draw it as fast as I could. And then when I had to do something else, I would like kind of shut the door and go. It was like this compartmentalizing of sorts, go on with whatever I had to do in life. And then come back to it right at the same place, get in wherever that spot in my head was, I could enter it and it would keep going. The other surprise was that animals and people would show up out of nowhere when I went through this process. And I've worked with animals a lot, so it didn't surprise me when I saw the animals showing up, you know, the horses from my memory, the metaphorical type of images like the dogs and the wolves and the snakes and all that. But my biggest surprise was when Lady Justice showed up in the middle of the book. And the first image I had of her was her sitting. She was just like a woman sitting on a chair with a bottle of pop, and she was drinking the pop. And I'm like, oh no, what am I going to do about this? Where does she fit in? And what am I going to do with this extra character? And how am I going to deal with her at the end, you know? So, but I just said, okay, she's here. I'll just keep going and see what happens.
Mm.
So, so that was a big shock, and it surprised me that in the end, it actually worked out that she became part of the story, and it fit in, and
Mhm.
I had no conscious control over any of it. She just appeared, weaved herself into the story, and it worked out. So I don't know how all that happens. And I think the biggest challenge for me was that this is a journey that I had to go into completely on my own. I don't know where I was going, where it was that I was in my head, but it was a place where I couldn't have other people there. It wasn't possible. There was no way for them to be there. And um, and also because it was written, I think partly during the pandemic, is physically there really wasn't much in the way of support. So I was alone in my house, going into these strange places in my head that I wasn't sure where they were. And my biggest fear, I guess, was that it would take me somewhere that I couldn't get out of
Mhm.
emotionally,
Mhm.
or that it was like just a dead end from the point of view of a book. But I think the frightening part, the most frightening part, was letting go and trusting that I would survive the whole process.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I could see this being this is like the most intense therapy session that you could go through.
Yeah,
It's this
yeah, it was.
process. So
Yeah,
yeah, it's hard to turn that off and just go about the rest of your day, you know.
yeah,
You need to eat and you need to shower and you need to do whatever else when you have this huge thing over you, which reminds me of some of the areas where in the book where this looming secret is over the top of young Emily and holding her down and holding her back in various ways, and makes me think about you just had very your visual panels were so varied and really mirror that narrative. The Lady Justice part, again, you know, she's kind of out and this huge figure
yeah.
busting out of panels. Can you tell me a little bit about your process as you created the layouts? Another thing we noted, the jury noted, is that you dropped the frames of the panels in particular moments. What did that mean to you? How did you work through this panel format that people are so familiar with in comics that you both used and subverted?
Well, being my first book, it was a bit experimental. I couldn't say, well, my last book I did this, so I'm going to try this on this book. And I think probably the biggest help in that area was that I'd just taken some courses at Langara College. I don't think the program's running anymore, which is very unfortunate because it was a fantastic program. And they taught a bit about design and panels and that type of stuff. So I had a bit of theory, and I took a lot from the book Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud.
Mm.
Um, but my main way of laying it out, the reason I was laying it out the way I did in these kind of overlapping panels was because I remember my first camera, and it was, I forget what it was called, like an Instamatic or something when I was 10. And it made these square
Mm-hmm.
pictures with round, like little rounded edges.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagined in a way my memories were these pictures lined up in rows, and they were like not perfect rows, so they would be
Mm-hmm.
slightly offset and slightly overlapping. So that's kind of where I went with that part. And in terms of the page layouts, I started with a 12-page layout, every page exactly the same, and this standard size, you know,
Mm-hmm.
paper, because I quickly realized that if I used good paper, I was afraid to mark on it. But so I just like, I can use as much of that paper as I want. So I did it out in pencil, but all the panels were the same size because I was just telling the story. And I had a bit of help from an editor who happened to be also one of the teachers at Langara College, who also did editing. And he said, you have to make some bigger panels. It's too crowded. So I said, okay. And what I did was I cut up the photocopier was indispensable. I photocopied it and I cut it up into all the individual panels and then arranged them on back onto the piece of paper. So they were like, now they were sitting as individual panels. And now I could move them around and I could spread them out on the floor. And I'll just show you, I'm working on my next book and I have them spread out on the floor. Hope I don't wreck anything by doing this. But I don't know if you can see in the background, they're spread out. So the pages are spread out. And then what I can do is move the panels around. And I just have, it's a page from my next book too. And the process is very similar to the last one. So you can kind of see here, this is a large page. I use this larger page when I'm going to trace it through on a light table onto the paper, the good paper. But at this stage, I'm just taking the story and I'm arranging it. So this in here, this empty space is where I'm going to put a bigger panel. So from the design point of view, I just leave that there and then I draw it in. But it allows me to arrange the pages and move them around and see the entire chapter or section at once. And then I can, then I don't have to imagine, I can go back and forth and I can go, okay, I can move this over here. This is repetitive. And then when I drop the borders or make something bigger, it's because I want to draw attention to it, or I want to draw attention to either the idea or the visual image itself. Or I want the reader to slow down for a second and to stop on that idea or panel for a second. So, and these are all things that I wouldn't have known about without the courses and without Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, because it's like, I didn't realize it before, but comics have their own sort of language. And I don't know if that's a universal one, but it seems that most of the comics I read kind of relate to that kind of language, that they have their own set of rules, which you can use or break or stretch. But and I think there's with the combination of words and pictures and this language, you can create literally anything, which is why I love the medium so much.
Yeah, well, it is very interesting because unlike traditional prose, I feel like artists like yourself in graphic novels have the ability to set pacing so much. Like if it's just text without those images, you kind of have no control over what the reader is, how fast they're reading through it, what sections they're slowing down for. But in this graphic format, you're right. You can say, hey, it's a 1-page spread. How long you spend on that 1 page is still up to the reader, but you have to look at that page before turning it. So you have that full moment with whatever that image might be.
Yeah, there's a huge and amazing variety of techniques that can be used for creating images or the speed of reading, or also tension. When you have an image that is different from the words, the caption, it creates this really interesting effect. And I don't really know what it is, but it's a neat effect.
Right. Well, I was also wondering how your relationship with this book has changed since it came out. Have you had any feedback that was particularly meaningful? Or has your relationship changed since you won the Lynd Ward Prize?
The relationship with the book. So when I first wrote the book, it was like I had this feeling of panic that I needed to get the story out before something bad happened. And I don't even really know what that was. It was like any number of different bad things could happen. Like the world could run out of paper, or, I would be hit by a bus and I wouldn't get to see it. Like there was this big long list of fears that I had. So it was kind of a lot of anxiety in getting the story out, and a lot of difficulty in reliving everything. But once this story was done, it was, I felt like the book was now the story, and it was separate. So I could now put it down, and it was no longer a part of me at all. The story was now the book, the events were now the book, and I was done with them. And, except for, really, really gratuitous detail, if somebody asked me, I could now talk about it as if it was something separate from me. I could talk about the events. And in terms of feedback I've had, when you go through something like that, it's really hard to describe how much living with this in different ways presses down upon you. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to be overly dramatic, but in some, at certain points, it feels like hell. There's and when you go through it, and when you've gone through it, you think, if there's anything I could do to prevent the hell of going through it, or the wasted amount of life dealing with the aftermath, that would be worth it. So I've had feedback from probably 10 or more different people in different, just random unexpected feedback from at least 10 different people who have shared a little bit of their story. Said the book helped them feel less alone. And that each time I hear that, it's like a feeling of relief. Mm-hmm. I've helped just a little bit with somebody else dealing with it and getting on with their lives again. Mm-hmm. And so I know there's and I see that's just people personally corresponding with me, but I've also seen a lot of reviews on Goodreads, especially, who, little short reviews of people saying that how it's related to them. So that has been, I guess, a big relief, it's like a separate weight. Mm-hmm. First, there's the weight of the story, and then there's the weight of feeling like I'm not doing enough. I'm not doing enough to help other people. So every time I hear back from somebody that it's made a difference, that it feels like that particular weight is lessened, that I'm not doing enough. And in terms of the Lynd Ward Prize itself, I saw myself as a mid-50s person who was maybe trying to get back something that I had when I was in my early teens, which I was really into comics. I didn't see very many of them. There weren't very many around. I mostly was into Tintin and Asterix and things like that, and Spirou, the Spirou albums. That's all I knew about. But so I had this vague feeling of guilt, or maybe I was doing something that was frivolous, and having my book assessed as a literary object or creation of some kind really got me to sit down and go, okay, maybe this wasn't me just telling one story that I had to get off my chest. Maybe this is something that I should use to tell other stories, because I have a lot of stories and ideas in my head. So it sort of gave me permission to go, okay, I need to put this this is a real thing. It's a real art form. It's not a pretend art form. It's a real art form and a real way of expression that is unique. And I need to prioritize it more in my life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's that makes me very glad to hear that you've gotten that feedback, and you've hopefully internalized some of that value. I particularly think some of the work that you did in regards to even just having information about abuse and about the criminal justice system and how it works through, you found out how it worked, and making that just more visible and available, I think is also something that's I think is particularly meaningful in terms of the outcomes of the book.
Well, it's hard to know what one book can do, but it was more a way of me showing a few things, and it may not be helpful from a legal point of view, or it might not, but I would love to see the legal system approach these cases differently. I'm not a lawyer, or an expert in that. I don't know how how that would look.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for me, there were a few things about the legal system that were very difficult. One is that as soon as I got a lawyer, I felt I was silenced again. You can't talk to this person. You can't go to the media. You can't do this. You can't do that. And there's this story like trying to burst out of you that you want to tell people because you've been told it's secret. So your immediate reaction is you want to make it not secret. So I felt silenced by that process. And I felt silenced. It took 10 years from the start to the finish of the legal system. And I think really the only reason it didn't take longer is I said, look, I'm done with the legal system. It's not getting me what I want. I'm just going to write a book. And as soon as I said that, miraculously things started to speed up for some strange reason. But the other is being silenced in the media. You're not allowed to use the person's name. You're not allowed to put it in an article in the newspaper. Anybody that I talked to in the newspaper, they were like, "Oh, we're scared of being sued. We can't use his first name." So you feel silenced again. Mm-hmm. And the other is the publication ban. I know it's going to be different for everybody, but some people want the publication ban. Other people, it's the worst thing you can do for them. Being forced, you're once again being forced to stay silent. And it is as hard as it is to be forced to stay silent by your abuser, being forced to stay silent by the people you're going to for help is very, very difficult to deal with. And so I don't know what the answer is, but it is not working the way it is. I know we're making very slow progress, but I feel like it's going to take 1,000 years if we go at this pace. There's got to be some better way to do things.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else you'd like to share with survivors of sexual assault who may be seeing or hearing this?
Every person is going to be a little bit different. Some people are going to remember parts of it, some aren't. It's going to vary a lot, but I really believe that the only power the abuser has over you is the power to keep you silent. And when you realize, and I thought that power stayed over me up until my 50s. And it wasn't until I wrote the book and drew it and, did like interviews and talked about it, and it was in the newspaper. And I realized nothing bad happened to me, that it wasn't until that happened that I realized that in reality, the abuser never had any real power over me. It was all imagined. And obviously, if you're in a dangerous situation, that's different. But I wasn't I wasn't going to be physically harmed. What happened to me, I was never afraid that I was going to be beaten or anything like that. That was not a fear. But I really believe that in most cases, healing is possible. And I think healing involves telling your story. So I guess I would recommend that anybody has gone through something, get whatever support they need, whether it's talking to friends or a support group or therapy or some kind of art form or whatever it takes, and go down that, because I was afraid, even in my 50s, I was afraid that I wasn't going to survive the process of doing this. And now I look back and I think, why on earth would I have thought that? I'm 50 years old. I have a job, I have friends, I live in a relatively safe country. Why was I even thinking that I wasn't safe to tell my story? So looking back, you feel a great deal of freedom, and the freedom to go through your whole life with less fear about things, and the freedom to not take the freedom to not have all this stuff being dragged along with you. And as hard as it was to go through the process, it was well worth it. And I felt that I'd hit a wall and I was forced to go through the process, because I'd been through therapy, I'd tried writing, I'd tried everything that I could think of, talked to people. And but there was still this thing left that I couldn't, and this was the only way for me to process it. So I felt like I was pushed into writing this book. And I don't know how to encourage people to deal with this before you feel like you're pushed into a corner and you've got nowhere else to go. Don't wait till you're 50 and you're like, I have nothing else. I can't function anymore until I figure this out. Realize that if you're a young person and something like this happened to you, deal with it now. Deal with it now, because you are buying yourself good years of your life where you can live a better life if you deal with it now, and I just don't wait for everything to collapse around you before you deal with it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Before I let you go, you did tease that you're working on a new book. Can you tell us anything about it, or are there any lessons that you took from our little secret that you're using to write this next one?
Well, it's hard to describe the next book. I haven't quite figured it out. It's still in this phase, but it's probably going to be 300 or 400 pages. It's longer. And it's sort of it's a memoir, but it's also a biography. So it's me. I have a friend who has a really interesting, unique lifestyle. And I thought, that would look really interesting in a graphic novel. It's just begging to be a graphic novel. So it's my process of asking him questions and learning about him and digging slightly deeper into his life and his existence, as I'm like looking for information to write this biography of him, and the extremely unique way that he lives, and finding things I wasn't expecting, and learning things I wasn't expecting. I don't think there's much more I can say without giving it away, but because I think it's a story that it needs to be experienced. Like, I want the reader to go through the same journey that I did. So I want the reader to start at the beginning with no knowledge of this person and the way he lives and conducts his life or his history, and then discover it the same way. So I think probably I'm better off not telling too much of the story, just to say it's very unusual. And the thing I learned from my first book. So after writing the first book, and it's like, oh, look, a book. I'm like, okay, so now I know how to write books. I'm going to write another book. So I started out with a bunch of sketches that I did, and then I said, okay, I'm going to turn this into a book. So I made a couple of drafts, and by drafts I mean I drew like 400 pages, and I didn't like them. So I'm like, okay, this is not a good use of my time, because it took months. And so I'm like, what am I going to do about this? Because I'd spend months working on this and done literally thousands of sketches, not drawings, thank goodness. So I kind of approached it as, instead of trying to create a book, consciously, I was going to try to find moods and images and feelings and ideas and focus more on them rather than the story arc. The story arc was important too, but I was going to approach it more like it was a poem. So, and then it came from a different part of my head, and it went back more to the place where Our Little Secret came from. So it comes from a place where you allow the story to happen without trying to control where it goes. And I think this latest version that I'm working on now, I think it's working. So what I learned is I'm not really a very good writer. If I try to write a story, I wreck it. So I have to go back to wherever the stories come from. There's a place, it's just a matter of finding this place in my head and allowing the story to come without understanding why or how it's happening. And I think that's the only way I'm going to be able to write, honestly, is consciously trying to create a story just doesn't work for me at all. So it's not that I learned how to write a book. It's that I learned where to look in my head for the story.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Great. Well, it sounds very interesting. We'll definitely keep our eyes out for it. Hopefully see it soon. Thank you again, Emily, for joining me today. It's been a pleasure. And again, congratulations on the Lynd Ward Prize.
Well, thank you very much for asking these questions and your interest, and thank you very much for the prize. It has literally changed my life.